this thing could not have come any sooner. I was greatly relieved when the bear market came, because in a bull market, it doesn't matter what you've got. You can just go into shall I name names? I won't name names, but you can go into that mode where, you create 17 different coins. Every one of them flops, but it doesn't matter because, you already got your exit.
Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Leising, and this is my podcast, Decent People. Welcome to the conversation. On the show today, I'm really happy to have Emin Gün Sirer, who is the CEO and founder of the Avalanche blockchain. Gün, as everyone calls him, has been a real help to me over my career as a reporter, and he's one of the smartest people that I've run across in blockchain. To set the stage a little bit, Avalanche is a blockchain with a $4.7 billion market cap, and it processes about 2 million transactions per day. Let's compare that to Ethereum, which has a $164 billion market cap and can process about 1 million transactions per day. We talk about Gün being raised in Istanbul, Turkey, and about large family meals and how experiences there with Turkish infrastructure got him into thinking about systems that worked perfectly and could be relied upon. We also talk about how crypto criticism goes back much farther than Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. And we talk about what's new at Avalanche and where Gün sees things going in this middle of this crypto winter. So I hope you enjoy the show, and let's get to it. Thanks. One quick disclaimer that I wanted to mention is that Gün is personally an investor in DeCential Media. So I wanted to thank you for getting sick a few years ago.
Thanks, Matt.
I don't know. I'm sure you remember this, but I'm going to say it anyway, because when I started first kind of reporting on the DAO hack and what had happened, I called you and I was just asking you big questions about it to try to understand it. And you told me the story about being so sick in bed and you were up with your computer and you and your student, Phil Diane, had, kind of stumbled across this exploit. And that sort of anecdote just kind of gave me what I needed to really jump into this story. And it led to the magazine piece, then it led to the book, and now it leads, kind of like I'm on my journey. But I can kind of almost trace all of that to you getting a cold in 2016. So I believe your son gave it to you. So I think I'd probably want to thank him more than anything.
That's right. That was quite an instrumental cold. Me and Phil ended up missing. We came very close to identifying the DAO hack. We could have prevented it had we identified it, but we mistakenly concluded that there wasn't a bug on that fateful line 666.
Yeah. Truth is stranger than fiction. How's your son doing now? He must be almost in school at this point.
He's 7. Yeah, he's doing great. Thank you.
That's awesome. I can't imagine what he's going to be with you as his dad. That's going to be really fascinating to see how that all happens. So thank you very much for being here. Just for listeners, I've written a lot about Gün, and he was in my book. He was a big part of Out of the Ether. So there's a lot of background that you can find on him, and I'll link to that in the show notes. But I did want to just sort of go back to your childhood. You grew up in Istanbul, in Turkey, part of a very large family. You have told me before that your grandmothers and your aunts and your uncles, and there was always just a lot of commotion at your house. So I was wondering if you could just kind of set the scene for us. What was that like growing up in Istanbul at that time? And maybe for our younger listeners, you could kind of tell us what the sort of technology you had access to back then was like. Like, what was the television you had, or were you able to get on a computer back then? Just kind of set the scene for us.
Sure. Let's see. We had a Love Opta, a black and white television, and I think the Europeans might remember this. It was huge. It had its own closing, little shutter system, so you'd close it when it wasn't transmitting. We had only one channel, and it was black and white. Started at 5 p.m., ended at midnight. At 5 p.m. would be the kids' TV shows for about half hour, sometimes for an hour. And it was great. It was a wonderful time to be a kid, to be a child. And there was hardly any technology. and it was a small country. Like, it felt like a small country, even though it was many millions of people. It felt like a small country. The TV shows, I should mention, like, I'm of a certain age, but the stuff I saw is kind of like everybody else's parents' age, because the country was so poor that the stuff we saw would be like multiple years behind the tip of like what, like right now you have simultaneous releases around the globe. Everybody watches everything at the same time. We're all up to date, part of a giant global community. Things were very different back then. We were behind, and then of course also in addition to like being behind in terms of time, being set back, watching the older TV shows from the US as they made their way to Turkey. There was also, the ups and downs. Our lives were pegged to how well the country did. There were years when I remember it was fantastic. We would get, the coolest TV shows, or we would get the coolest movies and so on. And there was a time period around the time of the big oil crisis, when the country was so poor that we ended up, I remember this distinctly, that kids' cartoons, we didn't have enough money as a country to buy them from the US or from Japan. So they ended up going to Eastern Europe and ended up getting this cat, Musti. I remember Musti really well. It was, unlike the usual, Japanese and American shows, Musti had, they had scrapped of, I don't know, 5 frames or something. It had this terrible frame, and it kept talking with his hands going into the camera like this the whole time. But it was always the same motion. So all the kids would do the Musti thing. They were like, hey, how is it going? So that was the Musti thing. It was a great time. There was hardly any tech. You would go to the bank, and, they had computers, mainframes, and they'd say, the mainframe is down. Can you come back the next day? Go to the airport, they're like, oh, we're doing the manual check-in, and then the line would be insanely long. Yeah. So most of the time when you wanted to get something, the technology just wasn't there. And that played a critical role in shaping me. I wanted to step in and show the world that we could build reliable systems that never crashed.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we'll get to that for sure. I remember, I guess this must have been before ATMs. My mom, when she wanted cash, there was a local liquor store, and they would cash a check for her, and that's how she got cash back in the mid to late 70s. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone's kind of familiar with what a big Italian kind of Sunday night dinner is. It's like, the grandmothers are there. They've got the pasta or the sauce cooking all day with the meatballs or the braciole and all that stuff. But I'd love to know what's a big Turkish dinner like when your whole family's there and you've got your grandmothers from your time when you were a kid. Like, what was the spread like, and what do you remember about that?
Oh, I remember this. Okay, this is an interesting question. No one's asked me this before. But you know how every kid has something they draw? You leave them alone, and they draw a picture of something. Mm-hmm. Usually it's a house or something else. I always drew that dinner. Okay, that was my go-to thing. I would draw the ginormous table with everybody's seats, and then the forks, I would draw them crooked, of course, because my drawing is absolutely horrible. It was always the same dinner. Well, actually, it was 2 dinners. So there are 2 things we do that are sacred to me. One is the bluefish dinner. That is a big thing. I gather everybody. My mother was the matriarch of our extended family, so all the uncles would come and visit from all of the extended uncles and their families. All my cousins would come by, and we'd have bluefish. This is a big thing. If you haven't had it before, or if you had it in Boston, people in Boston know this. It's okay in Boston, but it's fantastic. The sea temperature is different in Turkey. So if you have it in Istanbul, it's an out of this world experience. It's amazing. Have you had it, Matt?
I haven't, and I'm wondering, is it like the whole fish? You kind of bake it or something, and then you serve it, and you kind of like head on and everything
it's
like
grilled.
that.
It's the whole fish grilled, and we have to arrange something for you to visit me when I'm in Istanbul and you're visiting. It's going to be amazing, because there's nothing like it in this, and there's a whole set of things that go with it because they all complement each other. So the whole time, we here in the US, or Americans in general, we're working on, building 5 exact duplicates of the same space shuttle and conquering space. Yeah. Imagine the amount of energy and effort and expertise and know-how that went into that. Other countries put that exact same amount of effort and everything they got into other stuff to the best they could. And so this is one of the things that Turks put their effort into. And as a result, the resulting experience is amazing. So that's one of them. And then the other one is in the Sunday afternoons. On a Sunday afternoon, my mom makes Turkish ravioli, and that's another thing. And so you eat that thing, and everybody lies down on the nearest couch, and, and then you just kind of sleep it off. So those are the two big families. I grew up in a very big family. There's constant intrigue internally, but as far as the external world is concerned, they are the best people on earth. So that's sort of my ethics and ethos.
That's great. That's great. And you mentioned your desire to always want to build systems that worked, that functioned the way that they were meant to work, and that also kind of had a tie back to Turkish some of the infrastructure. Right? You've told me stories about how the windows would work, but they might not close exactly the right way, and there'd be a draft or something, and that sort of like kind of got to you in a way, or I don't mean it got to you, but it kind of like set off a light bulb above your head of like, wait, I can do this better. Like, can you tell me a little bit about that?
It did. It absolutely did. So I think this is something that everyone knows from from any developing country. You got to cut corners, right? You want to get to someplace, you got to cut corners, and corners get cut when people are building infrastructure. Things were not back then. Things were not built to the 100% level that we're all used to. The windows would close, sure, but the houses were drafty. The doors would close, but not with that satisfying click. Yeah. And so what happened that in my life, one of the transformative moments was when I was 11. So there's this big exam. It's about 1.5 million kids take it every year, back then. So I took that exam. If you're in the top 110 or so, you get the right to go to this amazing high school, amazing middle school, and then high school. And it's called Robert College. It's the first American high school outside of the U.S., and it's in Istanbul. So I was kid number 21, and so I was admitted into Robert College, and I didn't know what to expect. And I found myself in this gorgeous, beautiful building. It's unlike any high school you see in America. It's just really well built, huge place. And it had a different ethos associated with the engineering there. So I remember walking into this ginormous hall with a huge door, and I opened the door. It's very heavy. I'm a tiny little kid by then, like a little stringy little guy. Opened the door, and it closes behind me with this satisfying click. And I was like, oh my God, this is a different universe. And things just worked. Like everything about that place was designed so as to make the right things happen. And it was sort of like a bubble there almost. And so that really got me excited about generally engineering and overall, but specifically on building things that work perfectly every time. And we kind of take it sometimes for granted in certain areas, but it's really an ongoing fight. You got to have that sort of ingrained in your DNA, and it was started back then for me.
Did you have a plan back then, like getting into the American high school? I know that was obviously something you wanted to do. Was that just like a step in the process of what you thought? Like, were you always thinking, I'm going to do this, and then I want to go to the United States for college and later in my life? Or did things just sort of kind of happen to you as they happened?
No, I'm not one of these people who's like super planned, who has a grand vision, etc., etc. I find those to be mostly constructed stories, even for the people who claim to be that way. For me, it started out with wanting to build systems that I could control. You could imagine that I lived in this chaotic household, and I loved things that were predictable, that worked well, etc. And so there I was, and I saw I was fairly old. I think I was 13 years old or so, 12 or 13 years old when I saw my first computer. And it blew me away. And I was like, okay, this is amazing. So many things we do by hand, I can automate. And so there's so much to do. And I started building things. I started building an OS for this machine. I started building a compiler for it, etc., etc. I had a Commodore 64 that I loved dearly. Did a lot of games for it, and so on. And then that led me down this path of, I want to study this. There's so much depth here that I need to go to wherever the top place is where this is taught and learn everything there is about building cool systems on it. So that's what got me going. And frankly, it was easier to go from the high school I was at to the United States than to go back into the Turkish system and compete in that giant, 1.5 million
Yeah.
exam again to get placed into a university.
Yeah.
And luckily enough, I got a scholarship from Princeton that's addressed the financial side of this equation. So it was great. I ended up going to Princeton to study computer science. But I started out, towards the end of high school, I was really excited about AI. I was like, okay, well, I need to bring intelligence. I need to bring artificially intelligent agents. Wouldn't it be awesome if I could program robots that did stuff for us?
Yeah.
And then quickly I realized that Princeton, in my first year, I took a cognitive science studies course, cognitive science course, and I realized that AI was a long ways off. And at the same time, even then, and even in the United States, all too often computers were crashing. We were having computer failures all the time. Those of you who were around, the blue screen of death had not been invented yet. Computers were down. You'd go to the bank in the US, there's a chance it was down too. And then the blue screens of death started to happen. And of course, there's no shortage of all sorts of transportation accidents and so on. So building infrastructure that works is really hard. And that point kind of, struck home with me. And I was like, sure, AI is a nice thing to have, but it's a luxury we can't afford right now as a planet. We really need things we can count on. And so I quickly changed my interests away from AI, away from sort of high level stuff to very low level systems building. And I've stuck with it since. And the field has gotten even deeper, even more exciting. And the kinds of things we now know how to build are far more complicated than they used to be a couple decades ago, but so much more fun.
What do you make of AI technology today? Has it come around? Do you think we have the infrastructure to make it work? I know a lot of things are working on it, but kind of in the background. I'm not sure. When I hear about AI, I kind of know what that means, but I don't think I really actually know what it's doing. Like, has it kind of progressed to where or has it progressed to a place where you think it's really working these days?
Um, yeah, I have a lot of concerns about AI. So in certain areas, in certain domains, it's progressed immensely, far beyond what I expected actually. And so I mean, in some areas, it's great. The ability to whatever optical character recognition to use computers for vision, for simple vision tasks. We can automate mundane tasks. What I worry very much about is bias built into these things. The fact that we don't know how they operate doesn't faze me. I don't know how most people don't operate. It's
Good point.
somehow we have developed the kinds of techniques that, if I'm dealing with an adult, I know what to expect. Children are a different thing. I also have a set of expectations for them as well, but their neural networks are not as developed, and we all make adjustments for it. For computer stuff, you see a lot of sort of hardliners hold the line that if I don't understand how it works, then it's worthless to me. I'm definitely not one of them. I'm perfectly comfortable with large training sets and well-trained machinery. The problem, of course, is if the training set has any kind of bias in it, machinery can amplify it. And I have no doubt that these systems are going to excel at things that make people money, because
Right.
that's where they're applied the most. Showing people ads, I'm sure they're going to figure that out. I worry that in the process of trying to optimize money making, they might make choices that are societally super suboptimal. So they show a different kinds of, your experience going and browsing Amazon might be very different than mine, might be very different than a kid living not very far from me here in Manhattan, depending on the neighborhood he's in. So that worries me very much.
Yeah,
I
it
believe in
reminds
equality.
me.
I believe in equal opportunity. So that might not actually take place.
Yeah, it reminds me. There's a story just
Go
about a year or two ago with Twitter and its algorithm. If you put a picture of a white person and a picture of a black person in a tweet, it would always focus on the white person for the preview of what you would see. And then there was also news about the rates that people would get shown for like travel sites, for like Travelocity or whatever. It would differ depending on who that AI was picking up. Like for black communities, I think it was higher rates than for white communities, and just crazy stuff like that. That I totally share that concern with you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
so
worry about differential pricing. I worry about us getting charged differently depending on who we are, our stations in life, and so on and so forth, and or based on intrinsic factors. Just because you have a certain level of pigmentation, you get a totally different experience browsing the internet. That
Absolutely.
would just deepen societal divides, and I'm very worried about that.
And that's one of the great promises of Web3 is that it takes that middleman out who can have those levers and those algorithms that do that for centralized sites. So you went to Princeton, and then you were thinking. Well, you thought at first that more study was out of reach because of the money, probably like it would be expensive. But you realized that you could do a master's and a PhD at the same time, and they'd pay you to do it. And then that's sort of how you went to, I think, Washington for grad school, and then you ended up getting out and started teaching at Cornell soon after that. Is that correct?
Exactly right. Exactly right. I went to a PhD program thinking I'll do this for a few years, get a master's for free. But then they sucked me in because they were feeding us with all these awesome problems, really, really hard to solve, that no one knew the answers to, and it was up to us to solve them. It was a fantastic environment, and I loved every bit of it, and that's what convinced me to become an academic.
Do you know the term nerd sniping? Has that ever come across?
Yes.
Yeah, that's it's
No,
nerd sniping, right? You got nerd sniped, and here you are 30 years later, and
yeah, no, it's not.
yeah. I wanted to talk about one of the more interesting facets of your early career was with karma that you created, and this was I'll let you explain it, but it was sort of using one of the first proof of work protocols that was out there. This wasn't the Satoshi version. It was by two researchers. One was named Dvork, I believe. Could you just tell a little bit about that and what their proof of work system was, and then how you used it for what you were trying to accomplish?
Sure. The core proof of work idea is that to get some service, you need to prove that you have done some amount of computationally difficult task. This was first proposed by Cynthia Dwork and Fiat Nauer. So Dwork Nauer are the first two inventors of this idea. And I built the first coin system based on this back in 2002. So that predates Satoshi by 6 years. And the idea was very simple. Back then, we were dealing with peer-to-peer systems. And people who have used peer-to-peer systems, they know very well that people like to take resources from the peer-to-peer system. They don't like to contribute back.
Yeah.
So you need to rate limit this somehow. And my idea was simple. To join the network, you need to solve a proof of work puzzle. You need to have your machine do some proof of work. And when you do, you're awarded an initial purse. And then with that purse, you get to take resources. But when you run out and you want to continue being part of the system, then you will now need to contribute resources back. And the main application I saw for this at the time was peer-to-peer file sharing. That you can't just download files; you have to upload them every now and then. So that was way ahead of its time, 6 years before Satoshi. And so let me be clear about two things. It lacked two things that Satoshi brought. We were not using proof of work in the same way that Satoshi used it. We were not using it as part of the consensus protocol. So that's one difference. He added that brilliant addition that I very much respect. And the second thing that's different from the Satoshi attitude, if you will, is that we saw this as a way to fix peer-to-peer systems at large. Satoshi saw it as a way to change world finance. So his vision was far more extensive. So I was younger then, and I did not have the vision. I didn't think it was, karma would replace USD. Satoshi did, and so that's sort of what happened there. And it's very well cited among academics. But you got to get the timing right, and you got to get the vision right, I think.
Yeah. What was it like in academia for you back then when you were going down this route? Were you getting any support, or was it kind of an uphill battle, or what were your colleagues and sort of like what was Cornell telling you about this area of study at that time?
So peer-to-peer networks was just beginning to get launched in the early 2000s. And there I was, 2002, doing karma. I did a whole lot of other things like credence, peer-to-peer reputation, all sorts of peer-to-peer system measurements, and so on. It was a great time to be there. All the, every one of the bright students coming into Cornell was excited about the area. So I ended up doing a lot of work that I'm very proud of. My colleagues and the area in general, the systems area in general, tends to consist of researchers that, I would say 50% are at academic institutions, but another 50% are at the blue chip institutions of the world. They're at Microsoft, they're at Google, they're at whatever else. So especially the industrial researchers saw no benefit. They're like, why would you do this? Why not trust us? Why not trust Microsoft to run your infrastructure? Why not trust Google, etc.? So there was slowly there started to be some kind of pushback against peer-to-peer, that people started saying, there's no need for this. It doesn't solve anything that you can't solve with a little bit of trust, this kind of thing. And so that was one. And then the other thing I got from my Cornell colleagues, my mentors at Cornell, was, look, this peer-to-peer karma payment system seems really interesting, but you got to find another topic because you'll never get any funding for this. And the nation at large is concerned about terrorist financing. It's 2002, the year after 9/11, and people were frazzled. We were all frazzled. And so they said, and rightfully, they said, you won't be able to find any federal funding for research in this area. You should find something that is more in line with, industrial goals, et cetera, et cetera. So I did not push karma anymore after that. And I think that was the right call. I wasn't anonymous. There was no interest, and from a federal funding agency point of view.
That's really interesting. It makes me wonder if the biases against crypto were there before crypto was even there. I mean, a lot of what you're just saying.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it just has carried through, and maybe people don't understand that this kind of skepticism and the centralized, like you're saying, blue chip, kind of like what you don't need to do this, kind of goes back way before even, the Bitcoin white paper.
Oh, it goes back even more, even before me. In the 90s, there were systems designed to introduce micropayments without a bank. And Millicent is a system that's in this category. There are many others, and they all failed. And they failed because the banks killed it all off. So if you talk to those people, I was part of the circles where those things were discussed. And so when you talk to them, everyone will tell you that the incumbents will kill you. Yeah. So you got to be very, very careful around them. So 90s had those peer-to-peer payment systems get killed off. The karma, like these fully decentralized systems, they wouldn't have been funded. That was all there. I would even say after Bitcoin, it took a good 5 years for people to realize, hey, this thing's here to stay.
Yeah.
Right. The first 5 years, kudos to everybody who participated in that era.
You just reminded me of one of my favorite details in the book that you turned me on to was the HTML protocol had a field in it for how there would be payments in embedded in a website, right? And then it just said basically something to the effect of not available or something, right? Do you recall that?
Exactly. It's not implemented. Yeah, I think the very first, if not maybe the first revision, but I think it was the very first version of the HTML protocol had a field to facilitate peer-to-peer payments for content, and never implemented. Nobody uses it, etc. So, but even the early visionaries when the web was taking place, they understood the importance of getting business flows into the protocols, getting payments into the protocol.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing because obviously an easy way to explain crypto today is like it's the internet of money, and so that's but there were people trying to do that back in the 80s and 90s, but it just never quite worked out for all those reasons you're saying. So let's jump forward a little bit. Obviously, you were big in the Ethereum world and very much involved there. The one thing, the last time we spoke in January, I believe we did a Q&A, if you recall, and you told me the story of when the idea for Avalanche kind of came to you. And it was, as you told me then, you were having, I think it was a week-long conference at Cornell, and Vitalik Buterin was there, and Vlad Zamfir was there, and they were starting to share with you the early ideas around how Ethereum was going to change from proof of work to proof of stake. They used to call it ETH 2.0. And you sort of were like, this is going to be hard for Ethereum, but what if we go away and sort of create a new blockchain system that from the get-go is proof of stake and has all these other different implementations in it? Can you just tell me a little bit more about that? Because I find that sort of origin story fascinating.
Sure. Let's see. So this all started out with exactly that discussion. A number of us from Cornell met with Vitalik and Vlad in a multi-day sort of a workshop to try to see how ETH2 could be realized. And I tried to get from, and there were other people there as well from Ethereum. And I tried to extract sort of, how they saw the world and how they wanted to approach this problem. And it got so complicated that, there were like layers upon layers, component after component, and I just thought, okay, this is going to be, it may pan out, it may not pan out, but it's so complex that there is no way they're fitting all this in my opinion. It's just not going to happen. And it turns out Ethereum 2 did happen, but almost none of the things I heard in that workshop 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago, 7 years ago, almost none of them made it into Ethereum 2. So it may or may not work, but even if it does work, it's going to be so complicated that the resulting system is not necessarily going to be something that I would trust. So I thought I need to go back to the drawing board and think about much simpler processes. And there were really two options at the time. One option is you push on proof of work. You try to make proof of work better. But at the root of proof of work lies energy consumption, and it's not good for the environment. And I thought, okay, this is going to be incredibly inefficient in terms of energy, and it conflicts with my values. So the other approach is, we have all these protocols. It's like there's so many of them. You want a new protocol? I'll give you an unused protocol from the literature. There are many, many, many dozens, maybe hundreds, could be even more than 1,000 different consensus protocols out there. So, but they're all in the same category of classical protocols. And so I looked at those and I thought, okay, these classical protocols, they are, at the end of the day, they're just voting protocols. A small set of people vote, and then they collect votes from each other. And because you can't trust an entity, you kind of have to separately collect these votes. And it becomes incredibly inefficient. The more people you have who are voting, then the more inefficient this thing becomes. It's n squared in the amount of complexity that's going on. I, as a participant, need to know that, or on the order of n other people who are participating in this have signed off on a bill, on a transaction.
Yeah.
And so it works well for 100 people because there are 100 other messages to collect. If you got 1,000, then you got 1,000 messages to collect, and in aggregate you have 1,000,000 messages. You go to 10,000, it balloons up, right? N squared is grows really, really fast. So I was thinking about that, and I was like, okay, this is not the way to do this. And then one of the insights we had was, hey, could we get by with lighter messaging? Do I really need to hear from everybody? If all I need to make sure is we in aggregate are okay, we are making the same decision. I don't necessarily have to hear from everybody for me to say that, yes, everybody has seen this transaction and has okayed it. If I hear from enough people and they've heard from enough people and they heard from enough people, etc., then perhaps mathematically there's a magic tipping point where I don't have to hear from everyone, I just hear from some number of people and then I click and I make it final. And it turns out the magic formula is there, and it's incredibly early. You don't have to talk to vast numbers of people. You can cut out huge amounts of communication and achieve enormous savings in terms of both messaging complexity, amount of time spent, etc. And that's how we arrived at what was initially the very insight for the Avalanche protocol was, okay, well, so this thing can be incredibly performant, incredibly fast, incredibly scalable. So that's how we got started. But then there was, of course, a lot more development after that.
Yeah. So I think this is a good time to, can you explain for listeners just how Avalanche works? I think you have three different chains, and then there are different. Some of them have different consensus protocols, and like just as at a high level, kind of give us what is the architecture that you guys accomplished with Avalanche, and how has that allowed it to perform in ways that Ethereum or other layer ones aren't yet performing at?
Okay, well then there are two things I want to harp on. One of them I already touched upon, which is the consensus protocol itself. Every other proof of stake protocol that you hear about, whether it's Solana, Ethereum 2, whatever else it might be, they all use all-to-all messaging, and they all do essentially signature accrual. So there's a small number of people who vote on any given block. They collect signatures, and at some point they say, okay, enough signatures have been collected. This thing is part of the record, is now a permanent part of the record. So that's how they work. And I mentioned also already that this process is not going to scale well in the number of participants to the system. Now, Avalanche works differently. I mentioned how that does. So you essentially, instead of asking everybody, you ask some number of people who ask others, and therefore you get coverage. Even if some of the people in the middle might be lying, you do this enough many times, and the magic of the math works out such that it's a very small number of rounds. So on the order of 15 rounds or so allows you to achieve consensus among tens of thousands of nodes. This is unheard of in this space. When I was a grad student, if somebody came up to me and said, someday somebody will invent such a thing, I would laugh at them, laugh them out of court. And then it turns out that we now built a whole system around it, and it does this on a daily basis. Every second there are blocks being committed using this exact scheme. I am just every day, on days when I feel down, I kind of try to remember this and and pull myself up, because it's an amazing accomplishment technically. But there is one other thing that differentiates. There are many other things that differentiate Avalanche, but there's one other thing at the architecture level that differentiates it, which is the following. Systems like Solana, systems like Ethereum, these are single chain systems. There is one virtual machine, one validator set, and then one chain. And they just sort of go through those set of state transitions on the chain. They commit these transactions, they make adjustments, they execute smart contracts, etc. So that's what they do. Avalanche is multi-chain from the get-go. And it's not just three chains. It started out with three chains. You're an OG, so you remember the early days. Yeah. But by now we have, I don't know how many, I think there are at least a dozen production quality, high value bearing subnets on top of us. So the way the system works, the way Avalanche works is anybody can create a chain of their own. Those chains all use the Avalanche consensus protocol. They're super fast. They don't have to share anything with the rest of the system. They have their own validator sets. So if you have a game that's using that's on an Avalanche subnet that's doing your game transactions, and I have a DeFi application on my own subnet, the two of us have nothing to do with each other. Okay. If you have a load spike, it doesn't affect me. If you have congestion, it doesn't drive up my fees. And that's I think a very simple yet incredibly effective observation. Mm-hmm. Everybody fought me on this, Matt. Like when we said, this is how we're going to do this, everyone was like, no, that's not how you scale. And it's like, okay, I guess you on the internet know how to scale, except you can't implement it, whereas we believe that this will work. And by now it's been proven. Our fees are consistently low. Our speeds are insanely high. And it's all due to this architecture.
What are some
this
speeds?
Architecture can absorb insane growth. Go ahead.
Sorry, what are some of the performance stats, like your transactions per second or stuff like that you could share with us?
Sure. So the time to finality for our transactions is on the order of 1 to 2 seconds. So this is what I say officially. If I go and measure it, the actual time to finality is 740 milliseconds or so. So you submit a transaction, in under a second, that transaction has been finalized. It's permanent. It's not going to be reverted. Nobody else can say this. There are many other chains that do a lot of trickery, but Solana is going to take on the order of 15 to 20 seconds for finality. Ethereum 2 takes, I forget how many, but it takes on the order of at least 2.5 minutes. I don't want to say the wrong thing and have all the maxis jump on my throat, but it takes far longer they have blocks every 15 seconds. and then finalization after a long string of blocks. Whereas we have finalization at every block, single slot finalization already, and we have blocks at every second. And if there is load, you can even issue more blocks per second if you wanted to. So that's the setup that we have. It's an insanely fast system, and we are clearing. Right now, we're clearing about 55 to 60 million transactions per month.
Wow.
So that's about 2 Ethereum's worth. And and that's unbounded. I could add more subnets and grow that number, and more subnets are coming because of that particular architecture.
Yeah, and I was doing some research on the latest stuff on Avalanche, and I was really impressed to see that you're going to be launching episodes of an animated TV show, The Gimmicks, from a company called Toonstar, and that's actually going to be on the Avalanche blockchain, correct? And like they have NFTs that are involved with it, and I think that sort of speaks to what you're talking about, because I don't think that's even possible in Ethereum's wildest dreams at this moment, at least.
No. I think we are able to do things that other chains can only dream of, just because of the subnet architecture. We just signed an agreement with Gree, Gree, which is a huge studio in Japan with a lot of titles, game titles that I'm sure you've heard of. Like Civilization is one of them. It's an old title,
Yeah.
but they have many others. They have about 30 million monthly active users. And so they are looking to move those games onto Avalanche subnets. We're doing things with FEMA in disaster recovery. They want to have their own subnet for accounting, completely different domain. We're doing things with NFTs, of course. The NFT scene is burgeoning in Avalanche, even in the bear market. So there's a lot of activity going on chain, all due to this partitioned architecture with dedicated chains for different use cases.
Yeah, and so as you've been describing, all of these subnets are still under the Solana umbrella, and they're using the same consensus mechanism.
Avalanche umbrella, Avalanche.
What did I say? Sorry.
Avalanche umbrella, man.
Yeah. It's sorry. I don't. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Avalanche.
Solana has one chain.
Did I say that? Oh, geez. Okay. Yeah. Apologies. So yeah, everything is under
Yeah,
the
you said
Avalanche.
Solana. Solana has one chain. They're having issues with that chain every now and then.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
have many chains in parallel.
Yeah. You wouldn't let me get away with that. Slip of the tongue. So yeah, these are all under the Avalanche umbrella. But then there's another kind of there's a newer development, newish. It's bridges. It's where you're going to bridge from Avalanche to Solana or Avalanche to Ethereum. How and that's so somebody who wants to do something on Avalanche can do it there, and then they can move some assets over to Ethereum and do something over there. That's the idea. How important do you think that these bridges are going forward, like in the for the architecture of the entire ecosystem?
They are going to be critical. So we already have a fair number of different blockchains and a fair number of services. In an ideal world, what you want is for assets to be processed by the services that are best suited for them, or by the services that are best suited to the needs of a user. Users might want cheapness, they might want speed, they might want liquidity, whatever they might want. They should be able to take these assets and move to the chain where that service resides.
Yeah.
So I predicted that we would see a war of bridges about a year ago. And we're in the middle of that war. There's a lot of people competing to build better and better bridges, and we see that the chains with the best bridges tend to attract the best bridges and the best experience tend to attract users and retain them. The bridge that we built is one of its kind. We introduced some new technology to the space that nobody else was using, and we built a one of a kind of bridge that is incredibly secure and incredibly fast and cheap. So it uses trusted execution technologies to make sure that the bridge is safe and secure, that the funds, the keys that control the bridge funds are kept out of the hands of everybody, including the bridge operator. So these are non-custodial bridges.
Okay.
So there isn't a sysadmin who could abscond with the coins in the bridges and so forth. And using that bridge, we ended up bridging huge amounts. Maybe I think at its peak, it was $7 billion worth of assets were bridged over to Avalanche from Ethereum. Even as we speak, it's more than $1 billion, I believe. And also, we just very recently introduced the Bitcoin bridge, and it has about $90 million worth of Bitcoin. People have bridged $90 million worth of Bitcoin over to Avalanche. Actually, they bridged more, and then about 120, I think. But then they did whatever they wanted to do on Avalanche and moved back.
Sure.
So you can do that too. That's totally fine.
But what I'm trying to get at
is.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead. No, I want to hear what you want to get at.
There have been, this year alone, several bridge hacks and incidents. There was Wormhole, Ronin, Nomad. The list goes on. What do you think is? I know there are probably different situations, but is there any kind of overarching issue that these have? Like, is the security not just quite there yet, or are people not, like you're saying, it needs to be a kind of a trustless bridge? Is that not happening in these other instances?
People are trying to make these bridge hacks into something that they're not. Okay, so and people are trying to make a big deal out of very small differences. So Vitalik, for example, has said that okay, bridges are unsafe. You have to use a roll-up. None of the hacks that we saw would have affected the bridge, but would not have affected the roll-up. In fact, the exact issue that gave rise to a bridge hack would have given rise to a roll-up hack as well. So people are trying to overload this issue, and they're trying to make it more contentious than it is. Deep down, what you have to have is when you have two different chains, you have to have some software in the middle that is implemented in the most secure fashion possible. And if it has any secrets, those secrets have to be kept with utmost secrecy and confidentiality. And if there is ever a failure of one of the chains, then rolling back of one of the chains should not leave the other chain in an inconsistent state, or it should leave the other chain in a state that's that's recoverable. So the Vitalik point only applies to the third issue, and none of the existing problems, none of the problems we've seen have to do with that one. Vitalik, in my opinion, is worried about a fringe case scenario that would actually be very important for roll-ups. So if you want to do roll-ups, then you have to do it the way he's saying it. If you have bought into the form of the solution, then you also, then sort of a self-sealing worldview, then you need to do roll-ups.
Yeah.
But there are many different ways of actually bridging disparate blockchains. And there are different ways of implementing these bridges. We've just seen that these new chains, typically their runtimes are insecure. Or some of the bridge approaches, we found that a lot of these bridges are implemented in a very fragile way, and they just aren't really trustworthy from any engineering standpoint.
Okay.
And we started out by building a bridge in a conventional manner, and we saw that those bridges were not really to be trusted. That technology is just too fragile, fractures easily, breaks very easily. And then we ended up building our bridge based on a different technology. And that technology both brings confidentiality in a very strong way into this thing. Even the operators can't get at the funds. And it also brings less dependence on external parties. We don't need oracles to tell us. We still need some oracles, but we don't need on-chain oracles to interact with the bridge. We don't need on-chain smart contracts to make a bridge happen. And so the kinds of bugs that we saw, they affect you because existing bridges other than ours, they require a large trusted computing base on the chain itself. And any flaw in that base causes the bridge to be hacked.
Yeah.
So just for people who don't know, the number one bridge in all of crypto in terms of TVL is the bridge that we built. And there's a reason for that.
And that's total value locked.
And I think total value locked TVL.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are other, like, one of the things we're not getting into, and I hope the audience will be able to pick up on, is sort of at a level above the technology. It isn't really how you build the goddamn door. It's really about your attitude, your mindset when building the door. If you're going to build a door, if you're committed to the shape of the door, how it should be shaped before you start to build it, you're going to end up with funny looking doors, and like the roll-ups, like none of them are trustless. They just don't work. If instead you're a proper engineer, you're scientifically grounded, you are not vested, your ego is not tied up in the outcome, and you just want to build the best damn door there is, then you have far more possibilities open to you. You have a different attitude and approach. That's really one of the key things that differentiates us. We're scientists at heart.
Yeah.
We're not one of these religious cults that whatever it is that spouts a lot of Greek letters at people, hoping to dazzle them into submission.
So speaking of total value, the crypto winter is, continuing here. I was just writing the other day, almost $2 trillion of market cap is gone from a year ago. How is that affecting you guys at Avalanche? And what do you think, when you look out into the future, do you see the upturn coming, or are we still in for this for a little while longer?
Great question. I can answer it from a personal perspective. So for me, this thing could not have come any sooner. I was greatly relieved when the bear market came, because in a bull market, it doesn't matter what you've got. You can just go into shall I name names? I won't name names, but you can go into that mode where, you create 17 different coins. Every one of them flops, but it doesn't matter because, you already got your exit. I mean, there are people like this who constantly create new coins and new systems. And as long as the bull market is on, they make money and they just hop from project to project. You start creating unsustainable circular structures, positronic things that people buy into. And if you have a good Ponzi going for some short period of time, it can absorb all the growth, right? We saw this with Luna. Luna was absorbing all the growth. All the money coming into crypto was going to Luna and Anchor.
Yeah.
And so these things are crazy rides. It's like a roller coaster. The guy next to you is doing something really questionable, and you don't know what to do. You're not going to compete with them unless you're an idiot, right? You don't want to get into the same business as him. We saw some of the projects jump in and take the bait and create their Luna copies, and I thought that was really, really odd. I think that's a huge show of weakness. But in a bull market, anything goes. Too much is happening. It's crazy anyway, and it's go 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 world. Whereas bear markets is when the winners are made. This is the true test of the longevity of a project. The people who sit through these things, they're going to be here for a long time. They're the ones who are dedicated. So I'm loving it in many ways from a personal perspective. Of course, it affects me deeply that the entire space lost so much value. So that's a big concern of mine. But I'll say this as well. I live in Manhattan. I do talk to Wall Street all the time. And it's so different, Matt. When you and I first met, when you were doing the DAO hack, I don't know how many years ago that was. It was a different world. We didn't know that Ethereum was going to survive. Right? It was like the second big chain with new technology in it.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that the entire space was going to survive. Right? Bitcoin was doing Bitcoin things, but we didn't know how big it was going to be. Now, when I talk to people, it's clear that crypto is here to stay. Like, sure, things will go up and down. Will it go up from here, down from here? Who knows? But it's here to stay. So it's going, like Wall Street people, they will tell you up front. They're like, hey, you want to see our code, how bad it is? Your stuff is so much better. I've had this said to me so many times. These people are just chomping at the bit to change what they do. And they look at all the DeGen activities. They're not very different from what they know, and they do professionally as well. They're looking for ways to apply their tools and tricks onto a regulated or compliant version of the same. So this space is here. So now, the final question is, will it go up from here or down from here? I can't say that, but I can say this thing because it is taught in Econ 101, which is something called a business cycle. Businesses go through this up and down cycle. It's cyclic. It's taught. So I'm not making a price prediction on anything, but I will say that things come and go. And crypto is here to stay. It's emerged as an asset class of its own. So I'm very bullish in the very long term of what we will be able to manage with crypto. We will build systems that the world has never seen. We will get rid of compliance for the most part because we can build those rules into the fabric of the system. Mm-hmm. We can build more fair, more democratic financial services. And these are the kinds of things that get me really excited.
Okay, so speaking of here for the long term, what do you make of Elon Musk now owning Twitter and some of the changes that he is, putting into place, and some of the vision that he has for Twitter? Because, as I'm sure everyone who listens to this knows, crypto Twitter is kind of, a bit of a town hall for a lot of people in this space, but it looks like it could be changing quite a bit here going forward under Musk. What are your thoughts on that?
So Elon Musk is a divisive figure. There are a lot of people who love him. There are a lot of people who hate him, and I don't want to sound like either extreme, but I will say the following: Twitter was one of the most sluggish companies I've ever seen in my life. They were not innovating in any shape or form technologically. It's the same damn format. They spent I don't know how many years on the edit button. On my Android, if I have a threaded set of tweets and I'm editing them, my copy and paste is disabled. I don't know why. Not always, but sometimes it's disabled. Yeah. This is the kind of thing that just drives you up the wall. It's kind of like that window that doesn't close. Why is this? And why? Or Spaces, Twitter Spaces. Why does it make my phone get hot and then drop like 2,000 people all at once? My whole space disappears. Everybody gets upset. Is this hard to solve? It should not be.
Yeah.
And so somehow they did not have the internal culture to innovate. Now, to the extent that Elon brings fresh pair of eyes, a different attitude, a more engineering approach, a more can-do attitude, I'm all for it. To the extent that he ties it up with his political goals, he starts messing up the social structure, then I start to get concerned. Now suddenly the quality of discussions can drop. One of my pet peeves, and one of the things that I will be using as a litmus test that I should share with you, is simply the use of AI to suss out bot networks. Mm-hmm. So all big companies and every government, without exception, I'm sure, every government is using huge bot networks to shape what we see and think. If you think you have an original thought, I'm pretty sure that I don't have. 99% of my thoughts are not original. They're planted there. What I think is cool, what I think is uncool, it's planted. And that planting happens by these external parties manipulating what I see, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's elsewhere. That's certainly on Twitter. And so the old management was completely unable to tackle this problem. And we know that state actors in all sorts of places around the world were taking advantage of this to control what their citizens see. Yeah. So I have hopes that Elon can bring in some AI technology here to make it better. And I will see if that happens. If that happens, I'll be super happy. The content moderation stuff, I'm really worried about. And we'll see the speed at which he tackles these issues. He can screw one thing up too early, and then suddenly maybe it's all bets are off. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I'm guardedly optimistic for now.
That's great. Well, Gün, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it, as always. I wanted to leave you with one thought, or not a thought, but I wondered if you recalled when we spoke in January for the Q&A. At the end of those, I always ask, who would you recommend that I speak to for the next one? Do you, by any chance, remember who you suggested?
No, I don't.
It was Duquan at Terra Labs and Luna, and so.
Oh, good.
That was
good.
How
did that go? Did you manage to talk to him?
No, I didn't, and I couldn't reach him. But with everything that happened with Luna and UST, I was looking back at that interview the other day.
You can fault me for many things, but you can't fault me for being behind the times.
No,
I'm usually too far ahead of my time, and I end up facing a lot of issues before others. But yeah, Do Kwon would have been a great person to talk to about Anchor and what it was doing.
Yeah,
and obviously Terra Luna, its structure, and so on. It was an eye-opening exercise for all of crypto Twitter. It affected all of us. It was a deep cut for all of us.
Yeah, we're still feeling those effects for sure. Well, again, thank you so much, Gün. It's always a pleasure, and best of luck with Avalanche. I think you guys are doing amazing things, and it's just exciting to see how this keeps developing as time goes on.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. That's it for this episode of Decent People. We are produced by Matt Solon. Music is courtesy of Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes. Take care.